You're about to erase a human being with a mouse click. Not a trigger, not a button, a cursor. You sit in a climate-controlled room with humming servers and recycled air. The fluorescent light never changes. Outside could be noon or midnight. You stopped caring which. On your screen, full motion video. Grainy, gray-green. A rooftop, a courtyard, a figure moving between buildings. A calm voice beside you recites language that sounds legal, because it is. Positive identification confirmed. Collateral damage estimate complete. No strike concerns noted. Weapons free. You've heard it before. You'll hear it again. You tell yourself this is clean work, precise, surgical. But somewhere between the satellite link in your right hand, you start to feel it. If you're this far away, why does it feel this personal? Level 1. The screened candidate. You didn't apply for this. This found you. A score on a test, a psych evaluation, a clearance process that took 8 months and asked your neighbors questions you'll never know the answers to. One morning, you sign papers with language so dense you read them 3 times and still only understand half. What you do understand, you can't discuss this. Not the location, not the unit designation, not the nature of the work. You learn new vocabulary fast, not weapons vocabulary, protocol vocabulary. Observe, report, hold, wait. The instructors are calm in a way that feels practiced. They don't sell you heroism, they sell you process. They hand you doctrine, they hand you checklists, they show you the feeds. The feeds are always on. Someone is always watching. Before it's your shift, it's someone else's. After your shift, it's someone else's again. The machine never sleeps. You want the power. You can feel it at the edges of the training. The idea that you will one day see things no one on the ground can see, and that your certainty will matter. What they don't tell you yet is what certainty costs. They don't train your hands first. They train your silence. Level 2. The cap machine. You had this image in your head. One pilot, one drone, clean command line. That's not what this is. A combat air patrol, a cap, is not a single aircraft. Widely reported figures describe a typical cap as roughly 4 aircraft and nearly 200 personnel sustaining 24-hour coverage. Analysts, sensor operators, intel liaisons, maintenance crews thousands of miles from the aircraft they keep in the sky. You are one node in a living network. Your shift begins mid-orbit. Someone else launched the aircraft. Someone else will recover it. Your job is the middle, the hours between takeoff and landing, where decisions accumulate. The feed runs whether you're ready or not. No loading screen, no tutorial. The target area is already there when you sit down. Your predecessor gives you a handoff brief in under 4 minutes, then walks out the door like it's a shift at a warehouse. You inherit their work, their tracking log, their judgment calls, labeled and filed. You add your own. The pace is relentless, not because anyone is rushing, but because the feed never stops delivering information, and information demands decisions, and decisions demand certainty, and certainty is something you're still building toward. You're not flying, you're feeding a 24-hour appetite. Level 3. Remote Split Ops Reality. Here's something most people don't understand about this work. The aircraft that just appeared on your screen may have taken off from a forward location in another country. A crew on the ground there handled the launch and recovery. But you fly the mission from the continental United States. The connection runs through a satellite link that stretches across thousands of miles of sky, and through it, you operate an aircraft in a war zone without leaving your time zone. The Air Force calls this remote split operations. The concept is official. The documentation is public. The psychological effect is something no briefing quite prepares you for. You watch a takeoff you didn't perform. You inherit a sky you've never stood under. You exercise authority over airspace you've never breathed. The distance should feel protective,
And for a while it does. You drive to work, you badge in, you sit down at a station that looks in some ways like an airline cockpit crossed with a news production desk. You do your job, you drive home. Between those two drives, someone, somewhere, lives or doesn't. The detachment feels like immunity until the day you catch yourself checking the feed on a day off, not because you're supposed to, but because you can't stop watching. You commute to war, then drive home for dinner.
Level 4. The 432nd Wing Pressure Cooker. You're assigned to a unit with a real history and real pressure baked into its walls. Creech Air Force Base, Nevada. The 432nd Wing, the Air Force's first wing built around remotely piloted aircraft. The unit scaled rapidly as demand for persistent ISR and strike capability exploded. Output targets, mission metrics, coverage hours. The numbers climbed year over year, and the personnel numbers didn't always keep pace. Your schedule is a weapon turned on you. 12-hour shifts, rotating days and nights until your internal clock forgets what morning means. The tempo was described in open reporting on RPA burnout as existential, a word that sounds dramatic until you're on month 7 of it. You're told the mission is precision, and technically it is. The aircraft is precise, the optics are precise, the weapons are precise. The humans running it are running on 4 hours of sleep, gas station coffee, and the quiet understanding that calling in sick means someone else's workload doubles. Leadership talks about resilience. They offer programs, some of them actually help, but the gap between the support available and the operational demand is wide enough that some people fall through it and only figure that out later, after the deployments end and the mind starts to catch up. The drone never gets tired. You do. Level 5. You join the kill chain. There's a framework. You learn it early, but you don't feel it until you're inside it. Find, fix, track, target, engage, assess. The joint targeting community calls it F2T2EA, a dynamic targeting loop described in widely published doctrine. Each step is a link. Each link is a human decision backed by intelligence, time pressure, and accountability that flows upward and downward simultaneously. Until now, you've been in the find and fix phases, watching, identifying, reporting. Today, they move you into the chain. You are no longer the person who watches video and files reports. You are the person whose input shapes what happens next. Your assessment of a pattern of life feeds the target folder. Your call on timing influences the engagement window. Your report on a vehicle's movement either triggers the next phase or suspends it. You feel the difference immediately. Before, a mistake meant a bad report. Now, a mistake means something irreversible. If your data is wrong and an operator acts on it, someone who was not a threat becomes a casualty. If your data is wrong in the other direction, someone who was a threat disappears and resurfaces somewhere else with consequences you'll never directly see but will always indirectly own. There is no neutral position inside the kill chain. You are either accurate or you are dangerous. Your job is speed. Your enemy is doubt. Level 6. PID, the word that haunts you. Positive identification. The doctrine defines it as reasonable certainty that the object of the attack is a legitimate military target under applicable law and rules of engagement. Reasonable certainty. You zoom in, the feed is 1080p on a good day. On a bad day, it's weather-degraded, compression artifacts, thermal shifted. You're looking at a shape, a shadow, a hand gesture that could mean a dozen different things, depending on the culture, the context, the time of day. The analysts on the call argue, not loudly, clinically. One says the pattern of movement matches. Another says the metadata from a prior track is inconclusive. Someone pulls a frame from 40 minutes ago and compares it to now. You're being asked to confirm PID.
The clock doesn't pause for your uncertainty. There's a window, an engagement window driven by the target's movement, by fuel state, by the shifting geometry of where you can and cannot operate. The window is closing. Reasonable certainty is not certainty. It is the best available judgment under time pressure with imperfect information in a domain where being wrong in either direction has consequences. You've heard people outside this work say, how can they just decide like that? Now you know. It's not easy, it's not casual, but the decision still gets made because not deciding is also a decision with consequences attached. You learn the hardest lesson of the role slowly, over months. Pixels can lie. Level 7. Collateral damage, the math of regret. Before any engagement, there is a process. It is real, documented, and required. 5 questions drawn from widely published collateral damage estimation doctrine. Has the target been positively identified? Are there potential civilian concerns within the effects range? Are there mitigation options available? What are the estimated casualties? Is the expected military advantage proportionate? These questions are answered calmly, systematically, by trained voices on a secure line. You listen to them work through it like a budget review. Probabilities, distances, blast radius estimates cross-referenced against population density, expected versus acceptable. On your screen, you can see the neighborhood in real time, not a schematic, not a grid reference on a map, a neighborhood, buildings that have windows, a road that has traffic. You understand the math is necessary. You've read the doctrine. You know the alternative, no process at all, produces worse outcomes by any measurable standard. But knowing the math is necessary and feeling the math is 2 different things. The voices on the call reach a conclusion. They relay it up. Somewhere above your level, an approval is given. You did everything right. You followed the process. The process worked exactly as designed. And you still don't feel clean. You don't feel like a hero. You feel like a calculator. Level 8. DCGS Reachback, the invisible army behind you. You are not alone in this room. You were never alone. The Air Force Distributed Common Ground System, AFDCGS, is the primary intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance exploitation system for platforms including the MQ-9. It operates across multiple sites. Analysts at locations you've never visited are watching the same feed you're watching, processing the same information through different lenses, feeding their assessments back into the system. Reachback. The word makes it sound simple. What it means in practice: more eyes, more opinions, more pressure to synthesize conflicting inputs into a single actionable call. On a clear-cut case, reachback is confirmation, redundancy that builds confidence. On an ambiguous case, the cases that keep you awake later, it is a distributed weight-sharing arrangement that feels reassuring right up until the moment it doesn't. Because at a certain point in the chain, the distributed responsibility collapses into a single cursor position. 100 analysts, 100 inputs, 100 voices offering varying degrees of certainty. Your hand is on the mouse. The institutional knowledge, the satellite link, the intelligence apparatus, the doctrine, the training, all of it flows into this single human moment. 100 voices advise you. Your cursor still decides. Level 9. The assessment loop. The strike ends. You don't leave the feed. Doctrine requires it. Assessment is the final phase of the targeting cycle. Munitions effects assessment, collateral damage assessment, battle damage assessment. You watch the smoke. You look for secondary indicators. You count what can be counted. You note what cannot. You file what you can say in writing. You carry what you can't. The feed clears. Another orbit picks up the area an hour later. You review the footage in post. There are things you expected to see. There are things you did not expect. You file additional reports. You answer questions from analysts you've never met in person. You provide the detail required and hold the surplus in a place that doesn't have a file number. That night, you drive home. You stop at a grocery store. You stand in the cereal aisle for 3 minutes making a decision that should take 3 seconds, and you don't understand why until you're in the parking lot, sitting in your car in the dark, piecing together what your brain has been quietly processing since you left the station. The click was never the hard part. The hard part is every moment after. You thought the click was the hard part. It wasn't. You're back in the chair. New shift, new feed, new target folder sitting in a queue that never shortens because the demand for coverage never stops, because the mission never ends, because somewhere above the cloud layer in a sky you'll never stand under, an aircraft is already on station, already watching, already feeding you its signal. The voices run through the checklist. PID, CDE complete, no strike concerns noted. You've heard it before, you'll hear it again. You hover the cursor. You think about the first day, when you thought the power was the point, when you thought the distance was protection, when you thought the process made you clean. You understand now what the process is made of. Cap tempo in satellite lag, and split ops distance in legal language designed to distribute what cannot be fully distributed. You understand what PID means when the pixels aren't perfect. You understand what proportionality means when you're looking at a neighborhood, not a schematic. You understand what the assessment phase is really for. And somewhere, in a different building, in a different city, a candidate is signing papers they can't fully read. They want the power. They don't know the cost yet. The system doesn't need them to. It only needs them to be ready when the calm voice gives the words. And they will be ready. Because you were.